Welcome to another Creative Podcast, where creative outcasts come together to share their stories so we can all feel a little less lonely. I'm your host, Janelle Marquez. Hello, welcome back to another episode and episode 1 of the new year. As we enter a new year, I think this is one of many conversations we are probably having with all of our close friends and like the people around us. And yes, today we're talking about overconsumption and how it's ruining your creativity. I think as a creative, this is a topic that, we're probably all a little bit embarrassed to talk about time and time again. I know for me, this is something that I've always kind of struggled with, especially as a creative. I find that I can admit that there are plenty of times where I have found that I'm consuming way too much. And I'd say back in November or early December, I was put in a situation where I had the sudden realization of like, damn, overconsumption is seriously killing my creativity. And I just didn't think it was impacting my life as badly as it was until I realized that I was relying way too much on consumerism. This theme has actually been present in a lot more things in my life than I've actually really been aware of up until this point, because when I sat down to make this episode, I at first was thinking like there are all types of ways that we are overconsuming. Like, for example, overconsuming in general when it comes to like shopping and purchasing and buying. There is this like epidemic of overconsumption on social media due to like people wanting to have the next best thing. For example, the viral Starbucks bear cup thing. I'm pretty sure everyone who wanted one did not need another cup or another mug or whatever it is. And it's the same thing with Stanleys. Like, everybody was getting Stanleys, even though they probably had a hydro flask back in like 2016. Do we really need all these things? Or are we just feeling like we need them because everyone has them? And that's not where overconsumption stops. I even think in general, like social media consumption is such a big factor in like why our creativity is hindered in this society. I think the smart creatives are the ones who are consuming enough to be able to be inspired to create. And I find that a lot of people who want to create content do it because not only do they want to share their experiences or share their story or document their journey, but it's because like at one point they enjoyed consuming it. And so they themselves wanted to be in the game of creating. I'm one of those people. I remember giving myself every excuse in the book about why I couldn't create something, why I couldn't do something. And I remember I started my YouTube channel when I was a junior in high school, and I tried filming makeup videos that never saw the light of day because when I tried, my best friend looked at me and was like, "Your foundation does not match your neck." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not posting that." But then a whole year later, like I was a senior in high school, and I remember I was at an event and I was gonna film and capture stuff, and I said, F it, I'm just gonna start vlogging. And I did. And I remember like after that, I fell in love with being able to create and put things together. I actually ended up like having the worst grades of my entire high school career because I spent so much of my downtime and free time, like even in my classes, just editing and learning how to edit videos. And it was everything I wanted to do without even like realizing it. Like, it was just consuming so much of my time in the best way. I was creating as much as I was consuming, if not creating more, because the summer after that, I continued to still create. And going into college, I was creating. I'm pretty proud of like how persistent I was to begin with, because I remember like consuming so many Casey Neistat videos and pointless blog videos. If you know, you know. But like I spent so much of that summer just consuming so much vlog content. I was so inspired to create, and it fueled me. But now, like 10 years later, I find myself getting stuck into these holes where I'm like mindlessly scrolling and like kind of just losing my train of thought and like why I'm even on my phone and like why I'm inspired, or like if something inspired me, like I can't even remember what it was that inspired me. Like I just think short form content and my brain don't go too well together, if I'm being quite honest. I really do well with long form content. I am a huge long form content girly. I obviously have a podcast and that's long form content, but outside of this, like I'm really big on people who stream legal commentary, and I also will like watch people who make like 30-minute vlogs, 40-minute vlogs, because I love something that's just one whole long piece of content that allows me to kind of just like be in it for a bit. And like speaking for myself personally, I feel like content like that sticks with me much more. Like I actually think about a lot more of what I'm consuming because it's just something that I'm engaging with much longer than like a 5-second video or a 30-second video or like a minute clip. I've gotten to the point where I have consumed enough content to kind of know what I want to create and like make exist in this world. But I know there's so many creators out there who've also like gone through the battle of, oh my gosh, I'm doom scrolling when I could be like creating. And I know that's not the most positive type of talk to have towards yourself, but it's like a real honest thought that I'm sure so many of us have, where like you start to feel guilty because you're consuming more than you're creating. And it's just honestly hard to find a balance because like we're human, but also it's like, how bad do you also want to make your dreams happen? That's like another question you got to ask yourself. I currently am trying to find a balance between like how much content I consume and how much I create. Today, I think I've clocked in, maybe after filming this podcast episode, it'll be like 3 hours total of just creating as a creative. And that's pretty good because I'll be so honest, I have spent most of this last year, if I wasn't working on this podcast or trying a new hobby, just really consuming if I wasn't doing like work for others. And I'm not proud of that, but like also I'm human and a girl's trying to grow from all the mistakes she's made. So I know you're probably thinking to yourself, why does this conversation even matter? And like, is this really a problem? And yes, it's why we're discussing this on this podcast. But I think it's important that we exercise our brains a bit more as a creative. We need to continue to learn and experiment and consume different mediums and art forms in order to continue to evolve as artists. I have an episode where I talked about how to like evolve as a creative, and I touched on the fact that like consuming different media is a great way to just grow. And I think we're in a society where we consume a lot of things that are very similar, and it almost starts to become like an echo chamber. And I think that can be harmful because when you're not constantly exposing yourself to like new things, new opinions, just new stuff, your brain doesn't get as excited and as interested as it does, well, obviously to new information. But this also allows us to like think for ourselves. But what's more important to note is that we need to find a balance between over consuming, consuming enough, because we need to learn how to take in information, sit with it, and then form our own thoughts and opinions. Because when you are constantly taking in stuff but not digesting it, it becomes hard to differentiate like what are your own thoughts and feelings and opinions about something versus like what you heard or were told or read or saw. The brain needs time to process information. It's not normal to consume things at the speed that we do, especially when it comes to new information. It's the same reason why it's so important to go to bed and sleep and let your brain process everything you went through during the day. And especially if you're like learning something new, sleep is so crucial because it's how you start to form the patterns in your brains. It's how all the new connections get made and how, learning happens essentially. This is also how you can improve your problem solving skills. I have found through my observations in society that a lot of the times people just don't know things and are so quick to just Google something or ask ChatGPT or whatever their AI system is called. And instead of learning something, they've become reliant on a search engine. And while I think not all things need to be learned, it is still good to learn things and to educate yourself because it's healthy for the brain. It's good for you. We are not supposed to be relying on technology as heavy as we do, especially creatives. I think we lose our creativity when we get fed what our ideas should be, what things should look like, and all that jazz instead of making things happen. But I think the most important reason why this matters is that when you're actually doing things versus consuming, whether it's like being a consumer and shopping or binge watching Netflix or scrolling on social media, whatever it is, being an active participant in your life helps you build your self-esteem. It helps make you more confident because you're actually able to do things. You're actually able to produce things. You're actually able to make things happen. And I don't think I'm wrong when I say that the people that we see in the media doing things, living these lives we wish we had, those are the ones who are actually doing things. They're not passively sitting there letting life pass them by while they just take in all the things around them. I remember reading this quote somewhere where it was saying, start now and start bad. You can fix things and improve later on. Just start. And that stuck with me because I have talked about it multiple times in this podcast, but I'm going to repeat myself and let you guys know that, yeah, I was such a perfectionist for so long, and I've slowly grown out of my perfectionist tendencies over the years, but they still exist. And one of the things about being a perfectionist is like, you're so afraid to start anything because it all just has to be so perfect, and it's obviously not a realistic standard to have for yourself because then you just never start anything. And I know I'm not alone when I say that as a creative, I have gotten stuck in the cycle of consuming stuff, getting inspired, wanting to create things and finally planning it all out. But then when it comes to do it, I'm stuck and scared and afraid to make the thing happen because it's just not perfect. I'm coming up with any excuse why I shouldn't. And then I'm like, all right, I guess I'm just not going to create and I'm going to go back to consuming. And then the cycle continues. And it's exhausting when you're like, oh man, I just feel like I have all these things I can be producing and pushing out, and I could be doing all these things and putting it out into the world, but it's just not happening. And it's yeah, because I'm getting in the way of my own success. And once again, I also have an episode on this topic, and it's actually one of my favorites. I think it's one that more people need to listen to because so many of us have been in that boat or are in that boat, and sometimes you just need to hear the truth. Anywho, back to my point. I can confidently say that my self-esteem has always been the best when I am doing things rather than consuming. And in fact, consuming isn't the problem, it's the overconsumption. It's the going too far. So how exactly did we get here? Well, a couple months ago, I was working a job that primarily had me working a 9 to 5. So from 9 to 5 p.m., I found myself not really being able to make the time I wanted to film my podcast the way I had been. And if you're like, Jill, what are you talking about? Isn't it just a mic and you? No. If you're watching this on YouTube, and if you've seen the podcast on YouTube, I was filming all my videos with natural daylight. And this was never really an issue for me. From the beginning, I had a completely different setup to what I currently have. And in the beginning, I would sit in front of a ginormous window, and it had the most beautiful natural light all the time. So I was able to film anywhere from 8 in the morning up until 4 or 5 o'clock or sundown. So I was pretty good at keeping my schedule pretty consistent. But then we moved, and I have a small window in my office that doesn't get much natural light. And when it does, it's usually early morning up until maybe 3 p.m. When I was working my other job, that time period didn't really matter because I would find time to film my episodes usually in the morning before I continued on with my work, which usually started around 11 a.m. So fast forward to me working a traditional 9 to 5 where I just didn't have a window to film with natural lighting. I was like, oh, you know what? I need to find a new lighting situation for my podcast. I need to get new lights. I need to buy all these things. I need a whole new setup. All the works needed to happen. And then I looked at the prices of things. And not only were a lot of things out of stock, but also if I were to purchase a lot of things, the price was really, really hard for me to justify, which is crazy, but I really pride myself on trying to use what I have. I am a creative who really tries to not share what it is that I usually really use, but more of like showing people how they can recreate the things that I'm able to make with what they have. And I remember telling my husband, like, oh, I don't want to spend this money. My husband was like, you have a lot of lights, like all different sorts of light kits. Why don't those work? And I had every excuse in the book for why I couldn't make it work. And a lot of these excuses were the fact that I didn't want to have to like do something makeshifty and, well, get creative and work a little hard just to save a couple $100. But I just couldn't bring myself to spend the money for this lighting kit that I wanted. And I got very creative and decided to makeshift a diffuser for one of my lights. I do have this small lighting kit that I got off of Amazon. I believe it was maybe like 2-3 years ago when I bought it. And the only problem with it was that it needed a diffuser. The one that it came with just was not strong enough. It just didn't really block a lot of the harsh lights. So I used my creativity and I used a trash bag and a pillowcase to hang over the light to allow it to be more diffused and softer. And I was able to achieve the look that you can currently see on the visual version of this podcast episode and the one prior to this. I'm actually really satisfied with this light just because it's exactly what I was looking for in this space. And it allows me to have a more consistent look with my videos because as a creative who's trying to create content that's like visually pleasing, this does matter to me. It's something I've just wanted to do, but I didn't want to pay the money, and turns out it cost me absolutely no money to be able to create this. So that situation is what led me to eventually have the thought of, wow, I really need to just start getting a little bit more creative when it comes to finding solutions to the problems I have, because I'm gonna be so honest, a lot of my solutions to a lot of my problems are buying something else to make it easier, which I understand there's the argument of like, well, time is money, so if it saves me time, then it's worth doing, but is it really saving me time, or am I just being lazy? I don't know. I feel like that's still kind of an appropriate answer, depending on what the question is or the situation. But I knew in this case that I did not really actually need to get a new light kit. I'm actually doing really great with what I have, and it's like less of a crazy setup to put together. Anywho, if you're someone thinking like, how do I know if this is happening to me? How do I know if I've been consuming too far? How do I know if it's gotten too much? I think there are like a couple signs, but like if you have been thinking like, oh, this kind of sounds like me, it probably is you, and all of this is like probably true. Think of this as the tough love you needed, or like the wake-up call you've been waiting for. One of my first red flags that I was like consuming too much in the sense of like buying things was that, well, my first resolution to most things was to buy a new thing. And that went for like so much. Like it wasn't just the light. Like I was like, oh my gosh, I can't start a podcast because I don't have a podcasting mic and all the things. No, stop. That's not true. In fact, I filmed like the first 10 episodes of my podcast just using the voice memos app on my iPhone. I used a tripod to like prop up my phone as like an arm, and I just sat in front of a couch and spoke. I made it happen. And I did not upgrade any of my equipment until I made it past 10 episodes, I think. Same thing with like, oh my gosh, what camera am I gonna use to film this? I'm not gonna lie. I've been so guilty of like buying a bunch of new equipment just because I wanted to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And none of that was true. And it was like honestly all excuses to just buy something because I saw that other people had it and I wanted to make what they had. But like I've learned through my many years of creating content that it doesn't matter what you have or what you use. No one really cares. It's just like, what are you putting out? And are you even putting anything out? And like, is it even worth consuming? That's what truly matters. Okay, rant over. Another little sign that might be like a red flag that you are consuming too much is that you find yourself mindlessly doing things. You're doing things out of habit, not intention. So doom scrolling on your phone for hours and not even remembering like what it is that you hopped on what specific app for. I think this happens to me quite often. Like I'll be on Instagram and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to look up something. And then I see something else. And then I'm like down 35 different rabbit holes. And I'm like, what was I looking for again? Yeah, and I'll be honest, like my social media consumption goes down quite a bit when I create more, and it's quite refreshing if I'm being honest. Like I like going on once or twice a day to actually like see things I want to see, and then after that like nothing's interesting, and that's probably what it should be like for most people. But those are just kind of like a few signs I think that you could look out for if you're looking to not drown yourself in overconsumption in 2026. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I got so deep into this topic that I even decided to like start going through my wardrobe and really clearing it out of things like I don't wear. I have thrifted so much recently and I'm not proud of it, but it was also, I kind of had to because the job I currently have is a specific color scheme and I just had to add a couple pieces to my closet. But it made me realize a lot of the pieces I've currently acquired over the last few years, like I love. And I'm a huge fashion girly, so like I got a big closet. But there is a point of overconsumption where you're like, did I need all those things? And I'll be honest, because I'm a big fashion girly and like I do wear a lot of different styles, I found my solution to make sure I'm like not shopping excessively is to shop secondhand and thrift most of my clothes because I want to build a closet that's intentional with things I really, really like. And I also like the novelty of having items that like a lot of people don't have. But back to what we were talking about. There are a few ways that we can prevent overconsumption. And one of the first things is just thinking before taking action. Thinking to yourself, like, if I have a problem and my solution could be buying something or fixing it or doing nothing about it because you just don't care that much. Just thinking about all those three options, that's enough. Just thinking before taking action. It's as simple as that. We're really working on that one. The other thing is to use what you have. Get re-inspired by an old book that you have. Get re-inspired by an old movie you have. Get creative and try to fix something with all the things you already have. Learn how to fully use it to your extent because I'm not gonna lie, the camera I use to film my podcast episodes, I didn't really know how to fully use it until like December, and I've had it since last January, so it'll be about a year since I've had it, and I didn't fully understand how to use it until recently. And now I even love this camera more. I already loved it then, but now I love it even more because I'm learning how to use it to its fullest extent. And I recommend that more people use what you have and learn how to use it. I feel like I've talked about this one excessively, but I'm going to remind you to be mindful of your consumption. Just check in with yourself now and then. Like our phones keep track of like all our screen time and all those things. So there's no excuse for you to not be mindful of your consumption unless you're like turning off that report. I know people have done that and I've had mine on since I was in college. And I will say I've had some really embarrassing screen times, probably more than the average person. I'll be so for real on that. But my excuse was that I worked in social media marketing, so it doesn't really count. But it indeed was excessive. But the last thing I'm going to leave you with when it comes to preventing this problem is to create more than you consume. I talked about this in the last episode, and I really meant it when I said that my goal this year is to create and connect more than anything else this year. And so far, I think I'm off to a very strong start. I feel very good about the seeds I'm planting and all the things I currently have in motion. It's just nice to finally feel like I'm getting a better grip on balancing, like creating and consuming and also existing in my life. Yeah, that's just about everything I have for that episode. I really didn't think I'd have a lot to say until I thought about it and I was like, oh, we need to have a conversation about this. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I feel like this is a conversation that I'm going to come back to eventually again because this is just so relevant in our lives. So I want to know what some of your guys' goals are going into the 2026 year. How do we feel about overconsumption? Where are we at? In general, actually, like where are we at? How are we feeling? Because your girl is feeling so good. But with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.